Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm going to do just kind of a brief overview of the AdMech faction in Warhammer 40k. I will be speaking a bit about the lore, a bit about the current models, and a bit about the playability of the faction in late ninth edition. To start with, I'm going to give you kind of a brief lore understanding of the faction. So the Adeptus Mechanicus is the fabrication arm of the Imperium. They are charged with running Forge Worlds, and Forge Worlds are where many of the weapons, armor, and goods are created for the Imperium. Each Forge World may have a specialization, so they might focus on a specific type of weapon, or they might be better at making a weapon that's very common and built in other Forge Worlds. So they each have kind of their own unique twist, their own history, but we're going to focus mainly on Mars as that's the one that there is the most writing about. So Mars is the home world of the Mechanicum, and during the dark age of technology, when all of the human colonies were separated, Mars being uninhabitable, being a wasteland, kind of created a culture in which the people who knew how to keep the machines going were elevated to a point of importance, which makes sense, right? If you are solely reliant on systems, make sure that you can breathe the air and you can live, you would revere those people very highly. So the people that were the engineers or knew how to fix the machines that created the air and created life support systems that were able to manage the life support systems very quickly became the center of society. And they were called tech priests eventually. And a sort of pseudo religion kind of revolved around the practice of fixing and maintaining or creating machinery. And that's kind of where the core of the Mechanicus lies. Now, in the current lore, they have adapted their beliefs to allow them to fit within the Imperium's belief of the Emperor of Man being a part of their god. They follow similar to that of the Catholic religion, where there are three parts of a machine god, which is the main thing that they worship, the main deity, the thing that gives them all the knowledge of how to repair things and all that. They worship the machine spirit, which is like the soul of a machine. So if you appease the machine spirit, the machine will work. You make the machine spirit happy, the thing will function. Depending on how complex the machine is, the more of a machine soul it has, and therefore the more like intelligent it would be, the more of a ritual you would have to do to keep the machine spirit happy. And it's kind of a way of getting around the idea of artificial intelligence, as there are things in the Mechanicum that are AI, but they see them as just very complex machine spirits. They can kind of escape the negatives of or the heresy involved with having AI. Then there's the last part of it is the Omnissiah, which is the Emperor. This is how they get around the fact that, the Emperor of Man is revered as a god in most of the 40k setting. And the idea of him not being revered as a god is seen as heresy and as a, an offense that would get you and probably everyone you ever knew murdered. So you have an understanding of kind of how they came up, you know, relying on the people that can make the life support systems. And eventually that became a belief system and, worshiping the life support systems with various machines that kind of kept them alive. And then as it's been generations and generations, people have forgotten how to actually make the machines or they have no understanding of them. They just kind of know these rituals that they need to do to keep them running. And they kind of turn that into a series of religious rituals and symbols that they would do. So, although it's described as a religious kind of affair and they burn incense and they do all these chantings, essentially, what they're doing is performing regular maintenance on whatever piece of equipment needs it. And that's why certain spirits need more time and more specialized tech priests, because the more complex the machine, the more complex the machinery, the more complex the maintenance will be, and so on and so forth. Now, there have been some side effects, if you will, of this thinking, as they have very little regard for the human body, as they see the flesh itself and the people as just another machine in a sense. They are just, instead of made of steel, they're made of flesh. But at the end of the day, we are all machines, empowered, running off of motive force, which is another idea. Motive force is the energy that powers things. So it's electricity essentially, which isn't untrue, right? We use electrical signals to along our nervous systems to allow us to move, right? The way we send signals from our brain to any part of our body is via electric signals. And the way that most machines work is they generate some sort of power, either electric or, through some other means, some sort of energy that they use to move. So now if they just view like themselves as a machine, they're fully fine with just chopping bits of themselves off to augment themselves, to improve themselves, and doing that to others as well. And kind of a lot of the really dark things in the 40K setting, such as servitors, which are people who are lobotomized. For those of you who do not know, a lobotomy is when they remove sections of your brain, usually rendering you in the real world as almost a vegetable like state. In the 40K setting, they put computers in you to make you basically a robot, but you still have a human brain, so you aren't an AI, but you basically just do nothing but follow commands that are sent to you via the chips in your head. But many of the non-tech priests, including almost all the Scutari, don't have any freedom to do anything. They are just robots following pre-programmed responses. They are controlled usually by tech priests that are leading the assaults, or via data tethers that hooks them up to a ship, usually in orbit, where the generals can kind of plan and strategize without being in direct harm's way. That's also why, the AdMech people look so weird, is they replace most of their body with metal and other augmentations. And if you've not played the game Mechanicus, I'm going to play for you now the opening of the game.
From the moment I understood the weakness of my flesh, it disgusted me. I craved the strength and certainty of steel. I aspired to the purity of the blessed machine. Your kind cling to your flesh, as if it will not decay and fail you. One day the crude biomass that you call a temple will wither, and you will beg my kind to save you. But I am already saved. For the machine is immortal.
I think this does an incredible job to kind of help you understand the mindset of the reason why they don't replace their body parts like a traditional maybe guardsman would because they got injured in combat. They're purposely choosing to hack off pieces of their body because they view the human flesh as weaker than the augmented parts that they could add to themselves. And because they worship these, creations of steel, becoming more like them gets them closer to their god, to the machine god and to the machine spirits themselves. Now that you have kind of a general understanding of the religion revolving around the cult Mechanicus, and you understand that most of the troops that aren't tech priests are basically just mindless servitors, we can kind of jump into the model line maybe a bit more. So you've seen pictures of various models throughout this. The model line has a very, I almost think it kind of reminds me of Fallout, right? Like I'm a big Fallout fan, and that's one of the reasons that I was really drawn to this army. Additionally, I thought painting robots would be easier than painting flesh. So orcs is my next big thing, greenskins. But I wanted to start with something that was non flesh based because I think that would be a little easier to paint. And the little fiddly details I thought would be a great way to practice, more detail painting without needing to freehand as much. And I had a good time painting it. Unfortunately, it is one of the more expensive armies to collect. Now, personally, I bought a bunch of models online for cheap at the end of 8th edition. A lot of people were getting rid of their armies before the start of 9th edition, and I was able to pick up a lot with a bunch of models for a really good price. But I will warn you that AdMech is one of the more expensive ones to collect, unless you want to do like a vehicle mech where you mainly focus on the vehicles. A lot of them are heavier in the point cost, so you might be able to get away with a much cheaper force. But if you want to do mass infantry or you want to do like a Lost Katari, which is what's kind of meta right now, you're gonna be paying a lot of money for them. So I keep talking about these two different things, right? I keep talking about the AdMech and the Skatari. So they used to be two separate factions, now they are one again, but they have a different keyword, and there is a version of the rules where you only pick Skatari models with the exception of you can have one type of each type of tech priest. You won't take all of them, you'll probably take one or two. Hopefully, it will make the book more balanced in 10th edition, but as of right now, the Scurry units are really strong and the AdMech units are kind of weaker. And personally, some of my favorite models are the AdMech models. The robots, for example, are my favorite model in the whole line, and they're pretty. They're not in the best place right now. I think they're pretty overpriced point wise. I don't think they're bad by any means. In fact, the punch bots, I run them as double melee bots, and I've had great success with using them as counter charges. People kind of focus too much on the big vehicles, and if it's a mainly melee army, sometimes they'll, run straight up, get into melee with one of my tanks to try and blow them up, and then I'll just counter charge my robots into them and just wipe out whatever their big scary unit was because they didn't wanna get I mean, I get it. They didn't wanna get shot from a distance, so they charged it straight in, but I don't think people fully understand how good the robots are if you can get them where they need to be. With the army being such a shooting heavy army, having these robots is a big melee threat. They don't wanna push too far up or be engaged without having to deal with them first. Really buys you some time and lets you, kinda get in position where you need to be, so feel free to play things that aren't super on meta because you could have great success with it because if people are only playing against other admech players who are very meta with their army list, you will surprise them because they, won't be expecting you to do what you're doing. Speaking of play style, for the most part, admech is a shooting army. Most of our units excel in shooting. Our rangers have fantastic range, hence the name. Our Vanguard have an incredible volume of shots and are fairly mobile with their assault weapons. And you're gonna have tons of little Scutari running around with some fantastic tanks following them up. The Dune crawlers, for example, look super cool. Unfortunately, in the rules right now, they're not the strongest, but they look awesome. The hover tanks, you can use them as transports, or you can turn them into the destroyers, which have pretty good guns as well. I think the destroyers are pretty good at like running them. We have beautiful aircraft. I was able to get an aircraft for last Christmas. One of my friends that I worked with was kind enough to buy me one, and it looks great. And it's really good in game. There was a group of people who just tried to spam nothing but the planes, and GW had to make a special rule because of how strong it was. Because this is back before they really reined in the codex. Yeah, the line looks fantastic. The only unit I really don't like the look of are the Electro Priests. Mainly because it's just like I painted mine metal, so they don't look like they're shirtless buff dudes. But having shirtless buff guys in an army that believes that, being the flesh is weak, many of them have augmentations, just feels so out of place. overall, the line's incredible. The long flowy robes are nice to paint. I mean, I did a white color scheme, which I would not recommend because the GW whites are awful. But obviously, this was my first army, so I really didn't know better. Now the coat looks look great. The hoods and everything, you can paint most of your army without having to worry about any flesh. I think it's a really cool army that looks really good, very atomic era, sort of sci-fi, almost steampunky aesthetic. Looks great. In game, like I said, right now we're rather weak. Great shooting, great buffs. So what makes AdMech really difficult to play, but also really fun to play, is layered buffs. Your heroes can give auras or buffs to your units. You can pick to have entire army-wide buffs for that turn, depending on if it's an AdMech unit or if it's a Scutari unit. They have different sets of buffs that you can pick for that turn. Then if you play Mars, you can give all your Scutari units your Ad Admech units or your Cult Mechanicus, sorry, you can give your Cult Mechanicus units buffs to all your Scutari units, so they get 2 sets of buffs, and you can stack them same turn, so you can have 2 or 3 buffs going on at one time for your entire army, plus any additional ones that you have on your characters that you're divvying out. So really what makes it interesting and kind of fun to play is optimizing one unit for a turn for when you need it. But this is also kind of a downside because every Scutari buff has a negative. So if you want to make your melee better that turn, that means all your shooting is going to be worse that turn. If you want to make all your shooting better that turn, your melee is going to be worse. So it makes it a little hard to play because you almost want to specialize or you want to make it where you're only ever doing one thing at each time. Additionally, we don't have access to any psychic. So we're very reliant in either going full in on the melee and running maybe like a bunch of rust stalkers, infiltrators. You could do the punch bots. The electro priests aren't very good this edition, but historically the melee electro priests have been really good with some transports, and you could just kind of run all over them. Oh, and the Traxi with the flamethrowers are actually pretty good in melee too. And you can kind of do that, have a super mobile force that kind of goes everywhere, be melee, very melee focused, optimized for that. Or, which is typically how the in a more traditional way of playing AdMech, you do very shooting heavy with large columns of Scutari Rangers or Vanguard. You do massive fire. I mean, the Rangers are great for that. They're strength 4, so they'll wound pretty reliably on most infantry models. Have a massive amount of firepower. You just shoot everything off the table as you march up. You can give defensive buffs to them so that they stay on the table, and you just hope nothing can get close enough to you to get into melee. That's a real threat. Then you can also use the vehicles to back you up because obviously, strength 4 is not going to stop a vehicle, but the Thermite Cannon is strength 8. These las guns are incredible on the chickens. The chickens are very good value. I think they're 85 points for 2 improved las cannon shots, which are strength 9. So they'll wound most things pretty well. I think the only thing that is above strength 9 is I think there's a new tank or something that's strength 10. But they have some great, very hard hitting weapons. They have some re-rolls to ones, for example. They have very reliable ballistic skill. So very good shooting army. If you want to play a mass infantry kind of style shooting army, they're a great option. Tower, another good option if you want to do like massive shooting, but you maybe want a cheaper army to collect as they use more battle suits and stuff, which are, I believe, higher point costs than the Scutari, so you can have fewer of them. And Tau are a lot better right now. There's a person that plays Tau at my game store, and I don't think I've beaten him once. But yeah, this is a brief kind of general talk about AdMech, kind of understanding some of the lore behind them. We went over some of the models I thought was cool, and obviously we've shown most of the models on the screen at some point. My personal models, and of course the Games Workshop ones, as well as some ones I found on the internet. And then we went over kind of the play style, how you can play them. You can do some unconventional things by doing like a mass melee, but the drawbacks is the way the mechanics work. It's typically better to focus on either shooting or melee for that one turn because you can stack all your army wide buffs in that turn. And just you can only use them once is kind of tends to be how people play them. Let me know what you think about AdMech if you are a player or if you're someone that's interested in the army. Maybe for why you're kind of interested in it, what kind of drew you to it. Maybe you're doing some research before collecting. Put that down in the comments below as well. And thank you for watching.